This whole kaupapa has, there's definitely been like some super challenging times, and especially like probably being Pākehā in this ao, but it's always been about the kaupapa and the kids.
Yeah, and that's what I think I saw come through from Sam and Mick too, is that, yeah, they're Pākehā, and there is a little bit of criticism from both sides of the fence of them being involved in this, but they just felt a certain way about the kaupapa, that it didn't matter that they were facing all of that stuff.
It doesn't. So my oldest, Sam, he went to kindy, and then when I was hapu with Hoepa, Georgia May started kohanga. But when I used to go pick up them from kindy, it was just, I hated it. It was just not welcoming. So then they started at kohanga, and I knew hardly a word of te reo back then, but it felt like home. Like it wasn't my home, but it felt like home, and it felt welcoming, and it felt like so right.
Yeah.
So she went there, and then we pulled Sam out of mainstream, because I was like, well, she's not losing this. And then, yeah, they were at the immersion at Rafiti, and then pulled them when Bubby was over in Makara into the kura. True. But it's always been about the kaupapa.
The other side of it is also that your children are Māori.
Yeah.
Did that give you more of a manawa for the kaupapa as well?
Yeah, because I just felt like them being Māori was important for them to know their language, but to support them, I needed to know, to be able to support them. Like it was a momo wā for me, them going to kohanga and kura, and there was no tautoko for the reo in the home.
As a Pākehā, and then having children that are Māori, do you just feel like it doesn't even matter if I'm Pākehā or not?
No, it doesn't, because they're my babies.
Yeah.
But it's not just about them being my babies, it's about like all of our kids being our babies. And I mean, like I've worked in the kaupapa for 25 years. We've been in the kaupapa for 26, because Hopper's like 26, so started when I was hapu with him. But it just, I don't know, there's just something special about working in this environment and with the people that are in our community. And I mean, like some of our whānau, you know, like the matiaha whānau, like so Nene Mas always like, you know, learned so much of my reo from her. So now I always just think I can give back her reo, or you know, share it, not give back because it wasn't mine, but it's there being able to share with her mokopuna, or her great mokopuna and stuff like that.
Oh, that's a really...
There's generational stuff happening now.
Yeah. That was actually something that Mike picked up on yesterday when I was chatting to him, how that the whole idea was to, from his point of view anyway, not being whakapapa to Masterton, was to put the people from Masterton in the places to make those things so that it's a revolving thing for, not Masterton, sorry, for Wairarapa. So people like Nani Mas and other people from outside, well, that didn't whakapapa here, they were making sure that there were people such as yourself that are here, and your roots are here, and your tamariki as well, that the kaupapa wasn't about them, which was amazing to, you know, to have that whakaaro, because it allowed for other people to come and shine, or like give people from Masterton an opportunity to do something for themselves. So they did this thing where they could have just picked it up and then took over, but they didn't. You know, like they helped us to get to a place where we could do it for ourselves, and you know, you are kind of a result of that. I'm starting to see that with, you know, Georgia May at the library, just seeing faces in places where, you know, that's a Māori face and it's a Kura Kaupapa face. And then they're around and they're seen. So I think it's amazing, and a lot of mihi to those people that were guiding that for us. And because you see that, you now recognise that you are kind of allowing the same for these tamariki, providing opportunities for them to feel their wairarapatanga and their Māoritanga, and standing out in the community where they just feel better about being Māori. And that's what, you know, that's where I got to eventually.
I think too, like those ones, like, you know, like you and Georgia May, all of you guys that have come through, and then like now we've got like May Manaia and Manaia. There's so much that as pakeke we can learn from you guys, because you've come through this kaupapa right from babies.
Yeah.
And you know, the whole tuakana taina, you know, mā te tuakana ka ako te taina, mā te taina ka ako te tuakana. And there's so many times in here where I feel like they're actually my leaders and not, you know, I'm just kind of here to facilitate, basically.
Yeah.
So whatever the aspirations and the dreams are, I'm just like, you know, how does that happen? So like one of the things that I'll do every week, I have morning tea, so we have a lucky draw, and there's 5 kids, and I draw out the names of 5 tamariki, and those 5 will come and we have morning tea. But while we have morning tea, we talk about, you know, how te paenga, te kura, hea hanga ngoi koretanga, nā kataia te panoni i tētahi o ngā āhuatanga, hea hai rā āhuatanga, ki te hia koe te kiti i te aha. So, you know, all of those things, and, you know, koina ko ngā papa tākoro, ngā hua, o ā rātou kōrero.
That was, you know what, Perera said the same thing yesterday to Perera Hollings.
Yeah.
She was saying that, like, in Te Ao Māori, but specifically as she felt when she was growing up, that pakeke were involving the tamariki and the decisions, or involving them about giving them to have a say.
Yeah.
And, you know, I can just imagine how great of a tikanga that is, in order to make our kids feel like their voices are worth something. Well,
that's it. I think, you know, this is their place.
Yeah.
And if we don't listen to them and they don't feel heard, then how do they know that they can trust us and that they're valued? So everything that they share is try and make it happen. You know, like they wanted
and even
like
just to
the
be able to say it, and providing the space for that.
Like they wanted the playgrounds, they want a ngahiri.
Oh,
so like, you know, we put in a tono to matariki 2, no, what's that, matariki 2 rākau, so it's part of MPI, and we got 300 rākau, so those were the rākau we planted at matariki. But those rākau on the application was that these rākau are, you know, he mea whakamaumahara i a tātou koe ia kaumātua. You know, those ones like Pirihira, like Mike, all those ones that were instrumental in having our kura established and fighting for the reo in our community, all our kuia that were in kohanga reo. Because without their initial struggle, we wouldn't even be here. So they did that, but in the same way that they fed the reo to our, you know, to those that have kind of come before us and to people like me, we can now like feed these trees and keep these trees alive, which is in recognition of their journey and their hard work. You know, it's that kind of like that whole, you know, the prophecy of Paura po Tangaroa, that the mati, you know, ka mati atu te reo ka hoki mai me ngā tamariki. So, you know, that's part of that journey, was that whawhai that our kuia kaumātua had to establish kohanga reo and then kura in our area. And then, there's part of that continuing journey. And I think, essential to listen to our tamariki. You know, ideally, you'd want the tamariki to be organising their whole day. You know, they'd just come in, this will be just a check-in place, they'll be out and about working in the community, all sorts of, you know, our kura will be out in our community as well as our community in our kura. And then, but I mean, they'll bowl in here and they're like, oh, whapap, me hui tātou. And I'm like, well, he hui ki e tāku. And they're like, well, kei whia tō tangata. Because the tangata will be out in the, you know, I have someone waiting for a hui and I'm just tidying, but they'll bowl in. We need a hui right now. But that's cool.
It is.
Like, I love that, that our kids feel comfortable enough to just bowl in the door and say, right, we need a hui because we want this, this and this. I think like that's really special, and that'll be like right across the kura. I had one last year bowled in and he wanted a pō kani. And I said, well, we need to organise it. He goes, no, we can have it tonight. I can just go home and tell my mum, and we can tell our friends, and we can have it tonight. I'm like, no. So he came and we did a poster, and then put the poster out, and then we had a pō kani.
Oh, that's amazing. I love that stuff.
Yeah.
That's, you know, building the confidence in kids to be able to do stuff.
Well, that's it. You know, where else do we grow our next lot of rangatira in? But here, you know, this is the place, so it's about them. Kia ora, ko Pip Rimene taku ingoa. He Pākehā tēnei, ko aku tūpuna i whānau mai ki Ingarani, ko te rani Pāniora, anō hoki, o Tiamani hoki. I te tīmatanga o te rā rautau, i hunuku mai taku Kreiti Kranipa, te tīmatanga o te pakanga tuatahi o te ao. Noho mai ki Aotearoa, nā wairā, whānau mai taku kuia, taku māma, katahi kuau. E au e rangatahi ana ka hunuku mai i tāmaki makaurau ki te Wairarapa. E kona i tūtaki ai te pāpā o aku tamariki. So he Māori ia. Ka marina maua, whānau mai a maua tamariki toko whā, he uri rātou no Ngāti Porou, Ngāti Kahungunu, me Rangitāni. I a maua tamariki e paku ana, ka tīmata tā maua tamāhine ki te kōhanga reo. Ko tīmata ki te pakiki, te tuakana ki te kura aunoa i taua wā. Engari katahi ka tīmata a Georgia mai ki te kōhanga reo, whai whakaaro maua mo te kura. I te mea kāre maua e hia kia ngaro atu te reo. Taua wā tonu i niki a Sam mai te kura aunoa ki te kura. Kia ako hoki ia i te reo. I hara i te whakatau māma, i te mea he panoni, he tiki atu i tētahi kura, ka whakanoho ki tētahi atu kura, he ririki te reo, he ririki ngā tikanga ira katoa. Nā reira, he uaua, he nui te mahi i te kāinga ki te tautoko, i aia i taua wā, te tautoko hoki i a Georgia mai. Ko te whakaaro nui i taua wā, i te mea e ako ana raua i te reo, me ako hoki te reo i te kāinga. Maringa nui i te mea i taua wā i kona ia hone hurihanga nui. I whakariti akoranga reo i te kōhanga reo. So i whakatū
hone ne.
Yeah, i tahi akoranga reo ki te kōhanga reo. Ko te kaupapa o aua akoranga ko te reo e hāngai ana ki tēnā horopaki ki tēnā horopaki. He momo situational phrases. Nā reira, ngā mahi ki te whakarite parakoe hei whakarite i ngā, te kai mo te pauaka kai, te whakakākahu tamariki ira momo. I āta aro mātou ki ngā rerenga Pākehā i whakamahia e mātou i iara, katahi ka whakamauritia. I taku whare i whakairi i tahi pepa pānui pīnei ana te rahi, wetahi ki ia rauma. Nā reira, taku hia te pātai atu ki taku tamaiti, I don't know, how hei kīnaki mo tō tohi. It was like, oh God, how do I say this? Here it is. So, yeah, i tērā. Nā wairā ka mau tōtoka i taua reo. Whakawāti ai te hinengaro kia mau witahi atu rerenga ira momo. Nā reira, i reira tīmata ai taku hikoe ki te ako i te reo. It's rua te kaima ono tau e mua. Kei te ako tonu ahau. Pātai mai ki au ka ki atu he tapupi tonu te reo. E ki au hoki ka ako te tangata tainua ki te rā ka whai i tana hā whakamutunga. I te wā, i reira a hohepa i te kōhanga reo, tino wai Māori e au te whiwhi mahi i reira. Te kaumātahi aku tau i reira.
Did you ever see yourself getting into that, like before you were introduced to te reo Māori and all that kind of stuff, and kōhanga reo and Kura Kaupapa, or what was it that you called that Sam was?
Kura aunoa.
Aunoa? Is that bilingual?
No, that's mainstream. So the au noa is ko te au a te moana, and ko te au noa is that they drifted. So tupuna Māori, they came here, they followed the stars, they came, they had a path that they followed.
Yeah.
They knew where they were headed.
Oh.
As opposed to Pākehā, when they arrived, they just kind of went with the flow of the sea, and they drifted and went wee, wah, wah, whatever, and then they arrived, so I au noa. So he could have au noa. It's just like a mainstream, basically.
Yeah. Oh, lovely. Did you ever see yourself involved in this?
When I was about 18, I wanted to be a teacher. And when I was at primary school, we had a Māori teacher, Toby Rikihana, and he used to, it was like back in the early 70s or mid-70s, and we all had te reo Māori classes like every single day. And they were it was my favourite subject, and he was my favourite teacher. Like he would be to this day probably my favourite teacher. But then when I was 10, we moved, in the school we moved to, they had no deal. And then, moved around a bit again, came down to the Wairarapa, went to Kuranui, and I remember my interview, and my granddad was sitting next to me, and he really wanted me to do tech drawing, because he was like, did drafting and stuff like that, and I really wanted to do te reo Māori, because they had te reo Māori at Kuranui, and I'm looking at him, and I'm thinking, so I did tech drawing, because I didn't want to, it was my granddad.
But you remember a time in your life where you wanted to do something about
really wanted to, just always have loved the language. Won't say the singing because I've got one horrendously flat note. And everyone's like, don't you sing. Nanny Ange, actually, when I was at Kohanga, Nanny Ange, I was doing my whakapakari, and one of the assessments was a waiata, and Nanny Ange was one of the assessors, and she sat behind her paper, and her paper went like this, because she was shaking so hard with laughter. And when I finished, she was like, oh, kari, he kawa rawa tō reo waiata. Nā ka mutu tō kauhau ki te taumata, kia kaua koe e waiata waiho mā te whānau.
Oh, no. Koina hoki tētahi āhuatanga o te ao Māori.
Koina, he koro.
Koina hoki he āhuatanga whakawhanaungatanga, ne?
Koina.
Koina, tērā pēr ko tēnā tētahi o ngā mea I whakatata nui ake pēr koe ki, o e aroha nui ake pēr koe ki te ao Māori nei? Anō nei, kare te...
Te waiata?
Kau, like te āhuatanga o ngā tangata. Ai, e kōrero pēra ana.
There's just... taua wairua o te tangata. He rawi.
Like, obviously comfortable enough to be able to call you out for being a flat singer.
Yeah.
But that also kind of is like an endearing thing too, because they're laughing. Exactly. Because they still want you to be involved in this ao Māori, and I think Māori have a very special way of being able to make other people feel welcome.
Definitely.
And it could be the other way as well, or people are people, but for tikanga purposes, I think it's quite normal in te ao Māori kia kite I te tangata Māori e whakamanuhiri ana rātou e ngākau nui ana ki tō tātou kaupapa o te reo nei o te ao Māori nei.
So I always felt just, I don't know, comfortable, like at home. I felt more comfortable, and I felt more comfortable at Kohanga and then Kura than I ever felt like at Kindi and those types of places. I just didn't feel comfortable there.
And so how did you kind of go from not knowing any te reo Māori, and then obviously when your kids come along, and then Koanga Reo come along, and then you wanted to make that part of your world, and obviously for the tamariki as well, but then going to get involved in Kura, and then obviously in your role now, how did you make those next steps? Were there some changes, or there's just part of the progression of...
I think it was probably just all part of that progression. So when my kids, like when George May started at Kohanga and then Hohepa, I got the, what were they, Te Reo Māori, Let's Learn Te Reo Māori, I think the Pip Rimene books out of the library, and I worked through those like methodically. I'd come home from work and I'd work through those, and then we had the situational phrases that Hone Huri Hananui gave us, so you know they were in whare. I'd just hang out at Kohanga when I finished work, and everything that I learned I used till it became second nature. Yeah, and it was really just to be able to support the kid, or like my tamariki, so that it wasn't, you know, reo's not just something you learn at kohanga or at kura and then there's nothing at home. You commit to learning te reo, there's a whole, you know, that becomes your ao.
Your upbringing, and then how different that might have been to this te ao Māori as well. And as a Pākehā, did it feel weird at all, or did it kind of feel like, you know, because I haven't met many people who grew up, you know, in te ao Pākehā, and then found it easy to kind of adapt to te ao Māori?
I think probably as I learned, like you know, there were times where I made some big mistakes and really, you know, cross lines. But Māori have a really unique way of letting you know that you have, you know, kua he rawa tō mahi. Tērā o ngā kianga waihoma te whakamā e patu. You know, e hea ki ngā wā, kua tino patu nei tēnei i te whakamā. But a lot of it just felt like so much more natural. Yeah, I don't know. There were conversations with, like, you know, extended family in particular. I remember my grandmother, well, how are your tamariki going, you know, how are your kids going to learn maths and this and that? And then I was like, well, how do Japanese kids learn maths? You know, how do Chinese kids learn maths? Maths is an international, it's a language of its own. But yeah, people, you learn.
Yeah, I mean, it's not something that you wouldn't also find in a Māori household too.
Yeah.
And I've experienced that, you know, not with my own family, but with people that are really close to me, and with people that are family on another side who ask the same questions. And, you know, like it doesn't really have a place, because we're talking about language here.
Yeah.
You know, and but New Zealand has such an interesting kind of background with decolonisation, and that some of those views are almost, you know, they don't come from like a logical place.
They're completely illogical, because how does any other child in any other country learn to read and learn to do maths and learn to do so many other things in their native tongue just because it's not English? It's like, yeah, it's like there's a thing with it, if it's not English then it's wrong. But I kind of think, well, actually everything else is right and English is quite wrong.
One of the things that I took for granted when I was at Kura is the appreciation for things Māori. So yeah, we learnt maths, we learnt how to read, we learnt how to do anything that you would do in any other school. But then there were some other things that we did all the time that I, as I look back, I do take for granted, but I kind of recognise how important that is in Kura Kaupapa, like learning more tia and understanding what it means. Yeah, and then also learning mātauranga Māori, and that being separate to the Western science way of learning about our natural world and environment. Is that just as important to you as just, you know, traditional education, bringing mātauranga Māori into the lives of these tamariki?
Yeah, definitely. But I don't know, just probably a little example, but you know, like we talk about ngā tohu o te taiao, and even though raki are not a Māori, but not a native, but every year we get these same two raki that come to our kura when it's spring. So the kids, you know, they go out and they chase these raki, and I'm like, waiho raki, you know, he tohu tira kua tai mai a kuanga. And we had this big conversation this one year, and then the next year I'm in the hall and this kid comes running in and he goes, kua tai mai a kuanga, kua tai mai a kuanga. And I'm like, kua tai mai a kuanga? And he goes, ai, kua tai mai ngā raki, kua tai mai a kuanga. So he remembered that from one year to the next.
Wow.
So it's you know, you read the signs that the seasons are changing, and then you know that it's time for this or time for that. But there's so much of, you know, that mātauranga Māori is just so key.
One of the...
That, you know, that real appreciation for your taiao and the respect and everything being in balance. That whole taha wahine, taha tāne. But even, you know, like if you go to the sea, you take what you need. You don't take more than that. But you always do a karakia and then you leave something there in appreciation. All of those types of things are just essential.
One of the things that I had the pleasure of doing is to come on the morning where we did the aroha makare te tino maumahara I te kupu mo te wahanga o matariki e tukona te ahi ki runga. Ia te rā anō?
I don't know. It's like the ahunga or matariki, but you, like the ahi is the, you know, the release of and then sending up, hey?
Yeah, so I was, you know, really privileged to be able to come and experience that and seeing, you know, I can't remember what stupid time of the morning it was, like 6 o'clock in the morning on the dot.
Yeah.
I think we just made it in time. But to see all the kids there and listening to Mai Manaia's karakia and, you know, the deepness of his voice, is, you know, feels like it's the smoke's carrying it into the heavens, or having those kind of experiences as tamariki, you know, inside our kura, knowing that it's part of their education too, I think is a really wonderful thing. And also those kind of experiences the kids are going to remember for like a long time.
Yeah. Like our matariki doing the dawn karakia and the parakohi, we've done that like the last 2 years, but that's, you know, we want to have that as an annual thing that we do. But then this year too, like last year we went and we blessed our wakaama, so took that down to Onoki and blessed our wakaama. This year we went out and, you know, that was that mihi to our tupuna maunga, so we want to incorporate that with our matariki, that every year we go to a different maunga, different awa, so that our tamariki are able to, it's knowing where these places are, but then it's key too that they know the stories behind all of those things.
Which I think brings me to another area of that's important in terms of identity for children, is their connection to Wairarapa itself. You know, doing those things, does that generate more interest for the children in, you know, in our ohi?
I'd like to think it does. You know, like I think everywhere that we go on haerenga, it's important to share the story of those places and the people that came before us. And I know, like a few years ago, like when I was still in wharekrere, we'd go on a camp at the beginning of every year, but we'd go to different places. So we went to, you know, like out at Riversdale, so Castle Point, so Rangi Whakaoma, down to Ngāwei, Palasa, all of those places. But then the learning back in the classroom, as well as going to those places and talking about the tupuna, the naming of the places and the stories behind that while we were there, so they knew, you know, they're actually touching and seeing and smelling those places. Then we came back to the classroom, we'd do more in-depth research, and then they'd write about or do, you know, static images and things like that. So there's so much more learning for them, that even, you know, do their own books, things like that. I think that, yeah, those things are really important. And I think a lot of those stories too tie in with you know, like pūtaiao and those different phenomenons. So it's that Māori way of explaining these different phenomenons that we see in our world, and it just has a different explanation to it.
That's the te hohonutanga o te reo Māori, ne? Like,
Yeah, koina.
E hara I te mea me whakaroa ngā kōrero kia hopu kina I te mōhiotanga, hopu kina I te māramatanga pia o te ao. Engari he mea that you have to continue to kind of help the kids to be a part of so that they can get it right. So yeah, there's connections of whakapapa and pepeha to just the natural world around us. Something that I didn't kind of appreciate as well. You know, there's a lot of things that I didn't appreciate, but I'm learning to, as I look back on it, realize how great those things were. And what I like about some things that the kura do is they try and always include tamariki and tangi as well, and being on the marae. I, you know, when I remember going to those tangi, I didn't see other kura. You know, we used to see other koanga reo and that there. But that was something that we always did, right? Like we always went to tangi, and we always I don't know how much you guys do it nowadays, but I have seen the tamariki at certain tangi. Kind of just reinforces to me how important being on the marae is for education as well, or just seeing tikanga in its purest form happening, and then that being something that is ingrained in what we do. Do you guys still do that?
Yeah. So I think last year, there was a period last year, and I think we did 6 tangi in, it was either 2 weeks or 3 weeks. Wow. And those tangi were, there was Porirua, there was some here, I think it was Gisborne and Waikari Moana. But yeah, just sent through just a rōpū.
Do you feel like
kanohi mo te kura.
Do you feel like the tamariki know, or like they get it? Do you feel like they appreciate those things? I
think they do, and so if I go back to my own tamariki, and I know like when Bubby and, you know, Whaea Bubby and Matua Rick and those ones were here, and they would have tangi, and I can remember Georgia May getting picked up at like, you know, 10 o'clock at night. They'd go up to the tangi, you know, the next day might have been say in Tūranga or somewhere like that, and then they'd come back and they'd get back about 11 o'clock the next night. I've always been, you know, like, if I had to think about going away, I'm like, oh my God, I've got to pack this and I've got to organise this and da 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 da. Whereas Georgia May, because of those experiences, it's just boom, let's just go, up and gone. It's so much healthier, like it's such a better way of being. And I think for our kids to know that, you know, when there's a tangi or there's an occasion like that, that's where your priorities and your focus are, because it's about the people. It's that whole like experiential learning. But tangi are part of life. You know, death is part of life. And so for our tamariki to grow up knowing that that's part of life, it's not something to fear or be scared of, it's just part of life. And there's a whole process in Te Ao Māori around that just really honours the person and the whānau, and it wraps around so that everybody, at that time where the whānau are really moke, there's all this aroha and manaaki that's put around, and that's just part of our, you know, what we can teach our tamariki, is that this is just part of what we do. Which
are, you know, life lessons.
Life lessons, and it's important our tamariki learn about life. You know, that's what school's about, isn't it? It's not just reading and writing. It's life.
And it's also Te Ao Māori too, so like they are learning how to
be on a marae.
Be on a marae, run a tangi, or what you do at a tangi.
And you know, what you don't do.
Yeah.
You know, what are the tikanga in the whare, what are the tikanga on the marae ate, what are the tikanga in the kitchen, you know, all of those types of things. Like when we take our tamariki, you know, the tuakana they get the kai for their taina, then they'll help clear and go out and do dishes before we come back, that type of thing, so they start to learn.
So with all that said, would it be easy for you to, and this isn't supposed to be a tricky question or anything, but in my mind, this could be a really simple explanation, or it could be a really complicated one as well. But the question is, if you were to explain what Kura Kaupapa Māori is all about, is it as simple as saying, you know, it's this, or do you have to kind of explain a lot of other things in order to put the point across about what Kura Kaupapa Māori is about?
No, I think Kura Kaupapa is, you know, mo te reo me ona tikanga, he whakaora I ira. But ko ngā kaupapa o te Kura Kaupapa, he kaupapa Māori. He kaupapa e hāngai ana ki te ao Māori. I mena, ka te tiro anō ki te tuapapa o te Kura Kaupapa Māori, you know, ko te aho matua tira. Me ona wāhanga e ono, I reira he nui anō ngā kōrero. Yeah, they just sit like as a real painga, you know, he whakaniko.
He taumaha, he māmara nei ki te whakauru era kaupapa e ono, o ngā āhuatanga e ono o te ako matua I roto I ngā mahi katoa o te kura.
Well, I think I tēnei wā kei te kaha, mo te, you know, ehia ki ngā tau I nai nei, you know, kua kaha aro mātou ki te aho matua, you know, ko te ira tangata mo te tangata, ana pukenga, ana pumanawa, wana āhuatanga katoa. Te reo Māori, you know, koina ko te reo Māori me ona tikanga, engari ko ngā reo katoa, you know, te reo pāngarau, I reira he wāhanga anō e hāngai ana ki te reo tau iwi I rā momo. Engari, he reo toi, he reo puoro I rā momo. Mo te iwi, o ngā iwi, you know, te iwi, o ngā iwi o te tamaiti ake, engari, I rā anō o ngā iwi putanua I Aotearoa. Whai whakaro anō ki ngā iwi takitaki o tā wāhi I rā momo. Te ao, koina ko ngā āhuatanga, you know, te tiaki I te tai ao, I rā āhuatanga ka hua mai I te tai ao, wa tātou atua Māori I rā momo.
It's an amazing kind of framework.
Yeah.
But it seems as though that the framework isn't so much about just learning, you know, like in the traditional sense of school.
No, it's a way of being. So, you know, I mean, like your fifth one is āhuatanga ako. So it's how and where we learn. You know, does how and where we learn have to be at a desk in a classroom? Or can we learn by taking our kids to the river and, you know, water testing? Or can we take our kids and they plant trees and shrubs and help, you know, rejuvenate along the riverbanks and stuff like that? There's so much more to it. And for me, I think, you know, learning has to be something that tamariki can see it, taste it, touch it, smell it. It's got to hit all of your senses. And to be able to work out, you know, if we go out into our ao and into our environment, then we give our tamariki more opportunities to learn. Plus we're teaching them about their ao. You know, and if we get those 5 wāhanga right, then that's ngā tino uaratanga, that's our graduate profile. And so one of the things that we've been working on since the beginning of last year is our own, like a wairarapa curriculum, our maro wairarapa. And we sort of got 6 parts to it drafted. So we had a series of hui with our whānau, got all of their whakaro under each of those 5 parts of te aho matua. Then worked with kaiako as well, and we came up, there's like 8 whakatauki. And then we looked at each of those 8 whakatauki and what they mean and how they might tie in with our environment. And then we've pulled all those ideas from whānau and put those in under those as well. So for each of those whakatauki, we've looked at, you know, like te reanga, you know, ngā nohi, kura taina, wainga, whare kura, but then split that too under the aho matua. So what's all the different types of learning? And it's not a prescriptive curriculum, it's just an anga, and it just help guide us. I mean, we're still adding in layers and needing to get some more consultation and stuff like that around it. Also really wanting to look at how we can try and start aligning a timetable to a maramataka, you know, the Māori calendar. So if it's, you know, when the phase of the moon is like, you know, waning and energies lessening, then what might we do for learning on those days?
That's I think it's just an amazing thing to talk about and include in any type of education, because, you know, now you already are. You're already not a traditional education provider, like Kura Kaupapa Māori. We're already doing things that are different, but it's good to hear that you're still kind of looking at ways that we can include things like wairarapatanga and like not having just the same old every day, like you turn up to school and it's just school and then it's go home.
Yeah.
But obviously in the marama, with the maramataka kōrero, I mean, that's a new way of looking at learning too, I suppose.
And I mean, there's lots that's, you know, there's stuff that's work in progress because we want to be able to get it right. So we want to make sure that this is, we've got the foundation for this right, and then we can add that next layer, and then we can add that next layer. So if we go too big too fast, we're just going to fall over. And we want to ensure that it's sustainable and really going to work, and putting in, you know, all the research around it as well.
One of the things that I've been kind of thinking about in terms of what Kura Kaupapa Māoris do, or Kura Kaupapa Māori do, and a lot of what the evidence is out there is showing is that Kura Kaupapa Māori is better at addressing colonisation than any kind of other educational avenue, I suppose. Do you feel as though that's what Kura are doing? Are you aware of you know, the fact that it's there, or are you just more so concerned about the results and the tamariki than it is about these kind of abstract trying to resolve decades or years and years of?
I think part of it is, you know, like we look at the treaty, especially when they get to whare kura, and so our year 10s for the past few years have been to Waitangi for the week of Waitangi, so they're there and part of the Waitangi celebrations. They didn't go this year because of COVID, but you know, we're already starting to plan for next year's haerenga. So part of that, they learn about Treaty of Waitangi. The last lot that went up also went to Ihu Māpau.
Wow.
So they were able to talk to Pānea Newton about what was happening there. So then, and part of their learning, particularly in whare kura, is, you know, about land loss in the wairarapa, about the loss of our language, and, you know, the different Waitangi claims and acts and things like that that have impacted on the reo and different things. I don't know if it's so much like that it's a decolonisation, but it's more the whole way of learning, that our tamariki can learn as much about who they are and where they've come from and all those different things that have happened before them and that are still happening for them, and them having a say in their education, so that they, I don't know, they're educated in a way that that they are confident and competent. They kind of, the destiny of their education and their future pathways in their hands, so that they can be, you know, successful, whatever that looks like. Because, you know, not everybody's successful in an academic way. Some people are successful in other ways. So whether they're going to be artists or, you know, tāmoko or do whakairo, or they're going to be environmentalists and things like that. It's finding that passion for each of our tamariki and grounding that into our Māori, so that then they come out knowing who and where who they are, where they've come from, and where they're going.
Yeah, that reminds me of a quote from Wetini Mitai Ngātai, who said the value of the kumara, money and kumara is similar in that the value of the kumara is only in its ability to be able to feed the people. So comparing kumara and money together, it's like what you were talking about. You're not trying to get the kids to try and do something that they're just going to make lots and lots of money. That's not the whainga. The whainga is about doing something that is able to support them and then their journey into adulthood, I suppose. But you know, having that different way of thinking about, you know, life as a grown up, I think it's a really important thing in this day and age, where, because surely you would see all of the criticism in terms of the kura standing up against mainstream education. You know, I think that's one of the things that I noticed while I was at wharekura, at least, is that people would say, oh, but is the wharekura as good as any other mainstream education provider? And how would you respond to that kind of criticism?
I mean, yeah, we get that, you know, how do they achieve this and how do they achieve that? We have 100%, just on 100% success rate for all of our kids with NCEA. I mean, some may not get it in the year that they're going to be, you know, it might be a level 1 that might get it the following year, but that's their journey, because not all of our kids learn on that same trajectory. You know, you might get 66% of kids are going to get that level in the year that they're supposed to get it. Some are going to get it before then, but some are going to get it afterwards, but that's their learning trajectory, and we shouldn't be comparing one with another. You know, oh, they didn't get that in that level, they've failed. Well, actually, no, they didn't. Their learning trajectory is quite different than that Tomati's and that Tomati's.
Yeah, that's amazing, because, you know, in a mainstream, because I've been in mainstream education, taking a class that was lower than what my age was supposed to be. Like, I was in level 2 for the year, but I was doing at level 1 class, not because I failed in the year before, it's because I didn't have that class the following year, or the previous year. But that must have a good, like a positive effect on the way that the tamariki see education, as not as, oh, well, you didn't get it that year, so you must be dumb.
Yeah,
like
that's
those kind of
wrong, eh?
It is.
Such a wrong way of looking at things. I mean, we had a couple last year that got level 1. They got level 1 in year 10. You know, and we had a couple of our year 11s that got level 1 and level 2 in year 11. But that's their learning trajectory. There's others that, that this year, you know, last year got level 1, they might have been, they just all learn at a different pace. No one's, that's such a horrible word, eh?
It is.
Like,
dumb. It's a word that, but like,
it's such a, you know, that's such a deficit, negative way of thinking.
Yeah.
Whereas we've got to like be positive and nurturing our kids all the time. And I think too many of our kids, you often see kids that the behaviour might be a little bit on the negative side in the behaviour, because there's a distinction between the behaviour and the child. Sometimes they might do things that we consider a bit silly, but are they doing those things because they're not quite understanding what the work is, and rather than them, their friends saying, oh, you're dumb, you can't do it, they'll play up and they'll do other things to detract from them perhaps not knowing what that is. So it's reading all of those signs and then thinking, okay, why is this Tomati perhaps behaving in that way, or why do they do this, or why do they leave class when that happens, how can we better support them? Just unpacking. Those
pillars of te aho matua, you know, when you read them, I'm not surprised those are the things that you're doing, or that probably many other kura do too, because you're enhancing the child's place in the world and their connection to it, and you're trying to maintain their mana as they're going through this process. Yet a lot of Māori children in different like in mainstream education, and if I just go back to when I was at school, it's hard to not see or not have to put the walls up when you're a Māori kid in education, because people are going to expect you to be one or two things: dumb, poor. Those two things go together, or clever for Māori. You know.
See, and that is so
Those
wrong.
They are. I mean, I feel like the world's changing.
Yeah.
But when the kids come to Kura Kaupapa, they don't have to think. Like, they don't have to feel like they're out of place.
Yeah.
And
that sense of belonging.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think it's important with any Tomati, and particularly our ones, but no Tomati arrives at Kura with just that physical who they are. They arrive at Kura with all their whakapapa and all these stories of their family, you know, their whānau from generations before them. They come with all of that. And then they come with everything that happened in the previous week and last night and this morning. So we need to look at all of that before we can even begin to start educating and working with that Tomati. But you know, that whole thing about keeping their mana intact is just so integral. I think I'd just say, like, if people don't know about Kura and they want to know more about Kura, come in. You know, it's a place of learning. I mean, obviously, you know, there's a requirement, you know, kia kōrero I roto te reo Māori, but we can still work to accommodate in these ways around that. But I mean, it's, you know, it's just having a conversation and being aware that we are here, and there are really good things happening in our Kura and amazing things that our tamariki are doing, like really amazing things.
Like, obviously we've already talked about you being Pākehā, but as you see us moving into the future more and Pākehā taking up te reo Māori more, is Kura Kaupapa open to anybody who is ngākau maha ki te reo Māori, haina mana mai, Pākehā mai, Hamoa mai?
I wouldn't see it as, I mean, I don't see why it wouldn't be. You know, it's about our reo and, you know, te whakaora, te whakatinana, tō tātou nei reo. So, you know, the more that speak our reo, the more it becomes a living language. And that's what it should be. Te reo Māori needs to be normalised. So the more people that are using it, even if it's just a little phrase, at least it's being used and being heard. We had a bit of a celebration morning tea this morning because we reached 100 tamariki. But so our kids had lollies and chippies and cake, but I went down to Warehouse to get some lollies this morning, and there was a koroua that was leaving, and the wahine in the store was like, kia pai tō rā. And I was like, rawe. You know, it's that normalisation of te reo Māori, which the more people that speak it, the more normalised it will become.